point about that actually. For example, generally what happens is, so we have database. We have database. And actually the database is designed according to the business requirement. For the business requirements, we prepare the database. So for the business requirements, we prepare the database. Now important is, actually, we as a developer, our logic to interact with the database means we are designing an application, and our logic to interact with the database, earlier developers used to write to the database directly. Developers used to write to the database directly. Now when developers directly write to the database, then usually we call this data objects. That means the communication using data objects. Communication using data objects. But now developers are asked to write for business directly, not for database. Write for business. Write for business. That means when you are writing for business, this is called as ORM. That means developers are not writing for database, they are writing for business requirements. Anyhow, database is prepared for business requirements. Now these objects are called POJO objects, old JavaScript objects. So model represents the business objects, and business objects are mapped to database objects. That is what actually the intention of model is. So now recent days, model is not data objects. Model is actually the business objects. Business objects will map to the data objects. That is the approach actually. That is the concept of model. Means data is in model. Data is present in model. Okay. It contains the data, it represents the data. And view represents the UI, application user interface. Usually it is in HTML. That means user interface, that is in HTML. And controller defines application specific logic. Application specific logic. That means it contains the logic. What is the logic? That means, for example, you have a button, and what should happen on button click? Button click, right? So on button click, what should happen? That logic is defined here, right? That means in the HTML, we have a button, means in the view, we have a button. On button click, it has to get the data, display the data in a, we have a button and we have a table. Now what should happen on button click? That means view send a request to controller. Controller identifies clicks happen. Then it will communicate with the model. Controller will communicate with the model and gets the requested data. It will communicate with the model and it will get the requested data from the model. And after requesting the data from model, it will pass the data to the view. It will pass the data to the view. That means it will access, I'm just giving one approach. It will get the data from model and pass the data to view. This is the basic architecture that it uses. Very important is, in this MVC architecture, view will not directly send anything to model. View will not send anything directly to model. And model will not send anything to view. It will not send anything to view. Always the communication happens through controller. But view is actually binded with model. That means what type of data is coming that we can understand. What type of data is coming that we can understand. But data type, that means view is binded with model only to understand the data type. But data has to come from controller only. That means directly data will not go from view to model. It will not come from model to view. Always the controller plays the key role. That is what actually the MVC architecture. And why view is binded with model, that also I will tell you. We will see practically. We will see practically how this works in Angular. Now there is another framework, MVVM. In MVVM, directly we have a view model that will bind the data to the model. That later we will see. First we will see how this MVC works in our Angular and how it enables the data binding in our Angular, right? Hope you are clear with that. Now that is very important. So that is the reason we need to know about this framework, and practically we have to implement this, right? Let's see how we can practically implement this framework, how data binding works in our Angular application. That we will discuss in tomorrow's session. Okay. Tomorrow we will detailedly discuss about MVC and MVVM frameworks, and we will implement them practically in our Angular application. This is the key part in Angular to understand how data binding is very important. This is where all the concept revolves, interacting with the data and all. That we will continue in tomorrow's session. Okay, thank you. Yes, Mukesh, what is your doubt?
Like, sir, we installed the font awesome and bootstrap. So, like, we will use, suppose we will use only limited number of, styles and fonts. So, will Angular import all the CSS or only the limited,
What do you mean by limited?
limited means like, suppose, sir, we use only grid system from bootstrap. We have not used anything else. So, will Angular import all the CSS or only grid system will import into in the final, when we build the Angular application?
Obviously, you know Bootstrap, huh?
Yes, yes,
You know bundling, you know SaaS less.
yes, right.
Then if you know SaaS less, you will not ask a question about this at all.
No, sir, I'm asking because like in the Angular, it's a single
Currently,
page
we are
application.
not using SaaS and less, na?
Mm-hmm. Right,
Right?
right,
Right?
right,
Then that will
right.
not be a question at all if you know that. Because if you are using CSS, then your question is not appropriate related to CSS. Your question is related to SaaS and less. Am I right?
No, like in the final, the
What
CSS is
what
get
what you
generated, right?
what you know about SaaS and less?
SaaS are just sir, these are the framework which we can write less number of lines rather than writing in a more number of complicated CSS. Like we have an nesting rules like in the
Then what
ULLI.
is then what is minification?
Minification is just reducing the white spaces and reducing the size of files.
That means not changing the logic to minified version. Huh?
In the minified version, logic will not get changed. I think just only the white spaces, or we can reduce the bundle size.
Are you
That's it.
sure? Are you sure? You know minification?
I think, as per
It will
my
not
knowledge,
change
sir.
the logic. Huh? It will not change the font name to color name to color codes. Huh?
I don't think, sir.
You
As per
don't
my
know. You
knowledge,
don't know.
as per my knowledge, I think
Seriously, you know minification and you don't know that logic. Shall I show you now? Do you want me to
minification.
show you now about that?
Sir, as per my experience in the general, we have an CSS file
I,
and
I don't see. I don't care about your experience, but I will show you now. Shall I show you?
Yeah, that would